Good evening. I would like to call the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee meeting of July the 10th, 2019 to order. I would like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate the council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given by our clerk, Trish Sarnicki. If assistance is required, please see the clerk. Once you've evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of the town hall. Also, the Town of Lincoln Committee and council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. I would like to thank the public for attending the meeting this evening, and I would just like to remind everyone of our rules of engagement, to please be respectful while others are speaking, and to please refrain from clapping. Delegations will have 5 minutes to speak and are asked to stay focused on the agenda item. And please remember to silence all cellular devices. Thank you. Roll call. This evening we have regrets from Mayor Easton, Councillor Russell, and Councillor Pachariva. We have staff in attendance. Thank you very much. Item number 3 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Fourth item on the agenda, statutory public meetings. There are no statutory public meetings on the agenda. And delegations, we have none. Item number 6 is consent agenda. We have now come to the consent portion of the agenda, which we have 5 items on the list. Item 6.1 is the Public Works Quarterly Project and Program Update Report. Item 6.2 is the Community Services 2019 Mid-Year Progress Report. Item number 3, 6.3, is CS 15-19, the award of the contract of the Jordan Arena Roof Restoration Project. Item 6.4, CS 16-19, the 2019 Grow, Prosper, Belong Community Fund allocation. And the last item is item 6.5, CS 19.19, the award of the contract of the Beamsville Church of Christ parking lot reconstruction project. Would any member like to remove any items from the consent agenda to discuss? Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, items 6.1, 6.2, and 6.4. 6.1 and 6.2 on questions I have on those two reports, and then 6.4 I'm going to ask some questions on behalf of Councillor Pachariva.
Okay, thank you. I will ask the clerk then, so item 6.1, 6.2, 6.4, we will add them to the end of the regular agenda. Thank you very much. So we are going to move the other remaining ones now, or go to the regular consent agenda and come back? Okay. Okay. So you've heard Councillor McPherson requesting the 6.1, 6.2, and 6.4 to be moved to the regular agenda, leaving items 6.3, the award of the contract of the Jordan Arena Roof Restoration Project, and item 6.5, the award of the contract of the Beamsville Church of Christ parking lot reconstruction. We will require a mover for the motion to approve these items on this. Councillor McPherson, thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. So we will now move to the regular agenda, and we will be considering item 7.1, CS 14-19, the draft for the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Master Plan. We will have a presentation from Sarah Ain, Associate Director of Community Services, Steve Langlois from Monteith Brown Planning Consultants, and Byron Tan from Watson and Associate Economists. As this is a presentation that may or will take longer than 10 minutes, I would like to request that Council extend the time of the delegation. Your pleasure on that? Thank you very much. Ms. Ain, Mr. Langlois, and Mr. Tan, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Brunet. Good evening, members of council. Thank you for extending the time this evening. We're very excited to present the final project that we've been working on. It's really the culmination of almost a year of work that staff and the community have been engaged in. I'm joined this evening by Mr. Steve Langlois from Monteith Brown Planning Consultants, as well as Mr. Byron Tan, who's to my right, from Watson and Associates. They'll be co-presenting with me this evening, and certainly we'll be happy to field any specific questions that you may have at the end. Quickly, an agenda for this evening. The first half of the presentation is really the journey of how we've arrived at where we are this evening. So an overview of the master planning process, the project goals and deliverables, the alignment with our corporate planning efforts, which there are quite a few as you're aware, community engagement and feedback, and then we'll move into what you have received in your package. So you should have received both digital and hard copies of the actual master plan itself, the accompanying appendices, and I believe that there should be in your package or on your table in front of you a shorter version, if you will, of the 90 recommendations that are contained within. So we will be going through a snapshot of those recommendations this evening. Certainly we won't be going through all 90 of them. However, staff are happy to sit down at any point in time after this evening to take a deeper dive into those recommendations should you have questions. We'll be looking at service delivery and programming recommendations, facility and infrastructure recommendations, recommendations specific to arts and culture, as well as parks and open space. Most importantly, at the end, we'll be talking about what our next steps are and how we will implement this plan, because that's really the work that starts after today.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chair Brunet and members of council. So it's a very comprehensive report. I will speak quickly and try to move through my slides because we're very interested in any questions or comments that you may have. The master plan itself provides a framework for decision making for the next 10 years. It's based on several inputs, most importantly public and stakeholder input, which Sarah will document in a moment, socio-demographic and growth data, local participation in inventory profiles, industry trends, and best practices, with the goal of making sure that this is a made in Lincoln plan itself. Got it? Oh, sorry, you're quick. The plan outlines strategic directions and priorities for parks, open space and trails, recreation, sport and cultural facilities, programs, events and activities, service delivery and operations, funding and implementation. It's an actionable town-wide plan that is supported by extensive background research and consultation. We followed a 4-phase process, and we're pleased to say we're at the end of it and presenting the plan in front of you for your approval tonight. The project itself really started with 6 different goals. These goals were developed to guide decision-making within the plan and also to guide ongoing implementation of the plan. They are modeled after those contained in the Framework for Recreation in Canada, which is a leading industry document and something that your progress report for community services has also adopted. So you'll see a lot of reference in the plan to these, but overarching, we're trying to achieve enhancements to active living, access inclusion, arts and culture, connecting people and nature, supportive environments, and recreation capacity.
So as mentioned, there are 90 prioritized recommendations in the plan, including an implementation and financial strategy and the supporting appendices which you've received. Staff also received 2 internal discussion papers that speak to organizational capacity and service level standards, which will be really helpful for us to roll out amongst our teams. Additionally, there's been a development of a Parkland Classification system, which Mr. Langlois will speak to later in the presentation, but we'll be incorporating that in our future planning of Parkland, as well as updating the official plan when it's time for review with that information. We have aligned the master plan strategically with other planning efforts that are happening corporately. So the transportation master plan, you will see most of the references to trails development and things of that nature in the transportation master plan. There are some references to it in ours, but there certainly has been alignment there, as well as the economic development strategy and action plan, and most recently the beginning of the tourism strategy. There's a number of recommendations in here that have to do with arts and culture and tie heavily into special events development and tourism. And of course, we reference the current official plan, but also have some updates in here to the Parkland Classification system that we'd like to see moving into the update of that official plan eventually. So we are very proud to say that over 1,000 people contributed to the development of this master plan in a variety of different ways. We've been engaging with the public since last fall on this plan. So on your screen, you'll see a few of the different ways, and I'll go through them quickly because I think you've heard about some of them already. We did have an online survey that was available last fall for individuals to participate in. We had 4 public information sessions last fall, as well as 2 that just happened this past spring, and those were spread out all throughout the community. We invited stakeholders, so that would be user groups, sport groups, groups that have interest in access and inclusion, all kinds of different groups that we deal with regularly, but also groups that we don't deal with regularly that we want to be dealing with, that we felt needed to have a seat around the table. So we're very happy to say that a lot of stakeholders sat around the table and provided us information in focus group sessions. We developed an app through Spark Lincoln, and that was targeted specifically at children and youth under 18. So they were able to take a very simple survey to identify what they love about Lincoln and what they'd love to see more of or more improvements to. So we had almost 400 children and youth participate alone using that app, and that was last summer into the fall. We did internal consultation with staff from all departments, as well as you here at council. We also hosted a number of telephone consultations with counselors. And we had interactive ongoing feedback. So what does that mean? That means every time we received a piece of feedback on social media about a park enhancement or this would be a really good thing to do, that was captured and it was put into our data collection for this plan. We hosted a number of concurrent consultations. So pickleball, I know you've heard a lot about that. We had some pickleball consultations earlier this year. We did consultations last summer for the action sports amenities that are planned to go for at Serena Park. So all of that feedback that we are doing concurrently all feeds into this plan. They're not done in isolation. So it's really something that we're quite proud of, that many people contributed to the development of this plan. So here's a very quick snapshot, and you'll see in your appendices a lot more detail on what people said and what residents felt, but we can't capture all of that here this evening. So a couple key points that we wanted to emphasize: that people are really looking for inclusive spaces for everybody, for all ages, all abilities, all backgrounds. Very important to them. More programming, we heard that a lot. They'd like to see more programming, and our staff are just completing the next edition of Play Lincoln, and I can tell you that there's a really exciting array of new programming in there, expanded to different facilities that we haven't been programming as actively before. So our staff are already on top of that, which is fantastic. Beach access, we heard a lot about the desire to have access to our waterfront areas. So that's certainly something as we move towards the development of Prudhome's Park that we'll be keeping top of mind. All of the recommendations in the master plan are prioritized. They're evidence-based on community need. It's really meant to be an actionable living document, so it's something that can change readily as we need it to, depending on what the needs are of the community at any one time. By adopting the plan tonight, which is what we're asking council to do, you're not bound to implementing every single action in the time frame it's stated, but really everything will be coming back to you anyway. So if it has a capital tie-in, whether it's financial or otherwise, you'll be hearing about it before anything happens and approving it through the regular budgeting process. Timing of the implementations will be impacted by really our overall readiness in terms of funding, partners, and stakeholders, as well as site and appropriate land. So you'll see here that we've identified timing as well as priorities, so short-term, medium-term, and long-term, as well as high, medium, and lower priority. Again, you will be deciding on individual projects that are funded through the budget process. So we're going to start with a few overviews of the key service delivery and programming recommendations that came out of the master plan. Again, this is not comprehensive, every single recommendation, but ones we feel that you will have a keen interest in looking at. So we'll continue to work with community groups, we already do that, to adopt physical activity principles. You heard about health equity in all policy last month, and that'll be certainly something that we're helping to roll out in a number of our community groups. We'll also be looking to expand our recreation programming, which I mentioned earlier, to include more family programming, casual and drop-in times. We know that people are very busy and that the landscape of how they recreate is changing on a daily basis, as well as cultural programming and STEM. So STEM, for those of you who don't know, science, technology, engineering, and math programming, which is incredibly popular. We'll continue to promote free and low-fee activity options to ensure universal access. We want to make sure that people can participate in this community no matter what their financial circumstances. And we do offer a number of free programming options currently, but those will be something that we look to expand. We'll also be looking to develop an access and inclusion policy, which a number of municipalities already have, and we would like to follow suit. We think it's very important. We'll be reviewing all of our user agreements, whether that be with schools or service clubs or user groups, and that's something that's really recommended we do every 5 years to make sure they're current and fresh and really reflecting the best interests of not only our residents but the town as well. And we'll be refining and finalizing our service levels for recreation and culture and park services.
So the next set of slides takes on a little bit of a different format. We're going to switch gears talking about facilities and infrastructure. To support these recommendations, it's important to know that Lincoln-specific provision targets were developed to reflect your unique needs. While our focus is on identifying needs where possible, specific sites or implementation strategies have been identified. Although it is a 10-year plan, we've taken also a longer view with some of the infrastructure pieces to make sure that we are able to plan ahead and in some cases undertake additional investigation as required. So on this slide, we talk a little bit about some of the outdoor amenities. I'll just brush over this because there's certainly a lot of words here, but I'll highlight some of the key items that we wanted to put forward. Ball diamonds and soccer fields, really the focus for the next, for this term of council is upgrading what you have. So investing in some existing spaces to make sure that they are able to match with the capacity and needs of the community. So upgrading diamonds, adding some lights where possible. Longer term, we see a need for more sports fields to accommodate growing demand, changing participation patterns in those sports. And that will come up in a moment as well as we talk about, well, where will those sports fields be located? So a demand for additional park land moving forward will come out of that. In terms of playgrounds, you have a number of installations and new installations, redevelopments that will continue to occur, and that would continue to be a good practice. We look at one at Prokich Park that's under development, expanding the playground at Ashby Drive to match with that park's enhanced functions. Camden Park will be is a new site for you, and then Prudhome's and Serena Park as they continue to develop. Playgrounds are a basic element of most active park construction. A little bit longer term, there'll be some more growth-related and replacement-related needs. Staying outdoors, outdoor fitness is, we're seeing a lot more demand for this type of amenity within growing park systems. It's more of the weight-based outdoor fitness amenity that would appeal to older youth, older adults and seniors, looking to maybe expand on that and finding a site for that in the midterm, so reflecting that in our plans. Tennis and pickleball outdoor courts, as well as basketball and multi-purpose are on this slide. We heard, as Ms. Zane mentioned, quite a bit of interest in court sports. You're not the only community that's seeing that and riding the wave as well. So proceeding with the installation of 2 tennis courts at Angelina Prokich Park, and also looking to identify a site for pickleball courts. Fortunately, pickleball courts are much smaller than a traditional tennis court, but that's something that there's ample demand for in your community. And then evolving needs, just keeping our fingers on that pulse as we move into the future. Basketball and multi-purpose courts, demand for 1 additional court in central Beamsville. That would be a site to be determined, but we look at those as being more walk-to amenities. So for your children and youth that want to play basketball, and we even had this recommendation before the Raptors won the championship, so we can expect to continue to ride that wave for some time. So that will be an item, basketball courts to stay on top of for the near future. Action Sports Parks, this was an item that was presented to committee and council earlier this year, so continuing to implement the strategy that's in place there with a planned skate park and pump track at Serena Park, and then also consideration of a bicycle playground in an existing park as a second phase to that strategy. And then over the medium and longer term, finding some opportunity to expand that activity into the Jordan or Vineland area. Outdoor pools. So you have 2 outdoor pools in your community, one of which is aging, which I'm sure very aware of, the Jordan Lions pool. Looking to repair or replace that, and I know the wheels are in motion at other levels to make that happen, but it is a priority in that community. Splash pads, as a medium-term recommendation, providing some sort of provision in the Vineland Prudhoms area, ideally within an existing park, so a little bit more site identification required there. Waterfront facilities, just a general statement, and as we talk to your community, beach access is, as mentioned, very important. Folks want to get out and enjoy that amenity within the community. So Charles Daly Park in particular is your destination park for that. So just keeping an eye on opportunities, ideally lower cost opportunities to enhance that and find a fit with the programming that is being recommended for that site. And then certainly Prudhoms Central Park as that becomes developed. Off-leash dog parks, I think we talked about that last time we were in front of committee and council, but looking to develop an off-leash pilot project. And we say pilot project because it's just a matter of making sure that you have the location proper and that your stewardship groups, ideally you have organizations that are helping you to implement and steward that type of initiative forward. So that would be at a site to be determined. And just shifting to indoor facilities, multi-use recreation. We heard a lot of interest in 2 things. One is investing in your existing facilities. So that would be in particular when we come to arenas, Jordan Lions Arena, making sure that we're planning for its replacement or renewal over the course of the next 10 years. And providing some opportunity for gymnasium-based sports. Schools do fill a gap. But they're not within your control. They're not completely accessible and reliable or sized for the types of activities that the town and your community organizations are seeking. So looking to develop one municipal gymnasium at a coordinated civic site. So as BDSS opportunities become a little bit more crystallized, or those around potentially Jordan Lions Arena, we ask that those be considered. And just in terms of indoor pools, your community, like all communities that we work in, expressed considerable interest in one. We think the town is fortunate to have multiple pools just outside its boundaries, which has helped you to meet demand over the course of time, being in Grimsby and St. Catharines. Certainly we know that indoor pools are high-cost facilities that require a sizable tax base to offset their annual losses. Given this, we're not recommending one at this time. But we do suggest that the town be open to considering lower risk participation in any partnered projects that might emerge over the course of time. There's different providers. We certainly see that at your doorstep here and at the YMCA. They've become very active in that particular community as well, but there's others to consider over the implementation of the plan. So a few other, sticking with that, a few other recommendations. We've talked a bit about Jordan Lions Park, Beamsville Lions Park as well. Both have been developed in a piecemeal manner over the course of time. Want to make sure that they're being maximized, so some renewal strategies around those parks, making sure that they have the support buildings that are necessary for those activities and that the fields are working as they should. Prioritizing the continued development of a linked recreational trail system, and that's something that's also supported in the Transportation Master Plan. And last but certainly not least, with the aging of your community and others, age-friendly amenities. Every time we did our consultations, we heard about the demand for shade, bike racks, seating areas, washrooms in your parks. Not may not be appropriate for all parks, and we'll come to that, but making sure that your parks are set up to meet the needs of all ages.
So moving into our arts and culture recommendations, we'll continue to provide events to residents, visitors, and local enterprise opportunities to promote their trade, learn more about the community, and benefit from social interaction. We'll continue to build relationships with our local partners and provide capacity building support to community organizations, and to bolster availability of unique local arts, culture, and heritage offerings, and animating public spaces and destinations through cultural offerings such as pop-up activities, community events, registered programs, guided tours, and installation of public art. And you'll maybe note that there were a few pieces of public art unveiled a few weeks ago at the Fleming Center for part of the 5th anniversary, which we're getting ready to install up on the outside of the building for the summer months, which is very exciting. We'll continue to maximize the use and encourage the exploration of local sites and landmarks, and strengthen and expand our relationships with local service providers and organizations to support that local creative industry. Again, a lot of these will tie into our tourism strategy that's being developed currently. As you're aware, we do have a trust fund, the Whipple Trust Fund, which we've had for quite some time. It has quite a bit of money in it. We will be bringing a report back later this fall for you to review and consider regarding the drawing of additional funds to support beautification efforts in our community. We feel that there is a number of areas we could use some additional money to beautify the entire town, so we will be bringing back a forthcoming report likely in October or November for your consideration. And expanding the use of the Rotary Band Shell in Charles Daly Park. We heard a lot about how great the Sunset Music Series is and how wonderful Canada Day is, but that people would really like to see more activation in that space, and we agree with that. So bringing in local theater and dance and musical performances, things of that nature. So that'll be something that our cultural staff will be starting to investigate and working on for next summer. We'd like to see a children's gallery space in the new Lincoln Museum and Cultural Center. Staff have already started to scope out that project as well as apply for some funding opportunities. So we'll keep you abreast of any updates that should happen there. But that was definitely supported. What we heard from people throughout our consultation was we need to engage our younger generations in the museum. We need to get the kids through the door. If we get the kids through the door, we get the families through the door. And one way to do that is to build out a space specific for children. We'll be also evaluating what our future use for the interim museum on Beam Street is. We know that our time there is coming to an end in the next 12 months, so what will we be doing with that space? And there are some recommendations surrounding that in the report, as well as creating a public art policy. So we had public art unveiled a few weeks ago, and now we'd like to have the appropriate policy to commission that art, to take care of that art, to make sure it's part of our collection from a town perspective. We'd really like to bring a whole host of cultural organizations around a table. We think that right now there's a lot of silos that we need to break down, and we heard that from our stakeholder groups that, you know, they love working with the town, but they'd like to do more of it. So the development of an arts council or cultural roundtable for not only organizations here in Lincoln, but perhaps into West Niagara. We work with a lot of those groups out of Grimsby as well. So that will be something, again, that our cultural team will be looking to move forward. And we'll continue to seek and apply for external funds, of course, to support the investment in arts and culture and heritage.
So Sarah had mentioned it earlier, one of the policy items coming out of this plan is the development of a Parkland Classification system, which ideally becomes something that the planning department is able to work with, as well as Parks, Public Works, Recreation. The classification system itself is established to guide future park development. It's also helpful in identifying future priorities for investment and with aligning service levels and maintenance requirements. So it's important to have one of these in place. There's two key aspects I'll just point out. There's 5 different categories of parkland. These are more of your active types of spaces that that house a lot of the types of facilities I was just speaking to. And then you have the open space component, which tends to be not as well developed because of the natural features, woodlots, open space, steep slopes, and others. Next one. So we've continued by, I mentioned earlier about seating, bike racks, washrooms, what's appropriate for what park. The plan itself identifies some suitable amenities according to those park typologies, which is helpful when you're investigating locations and developing new parks. In terms of the overall supply, bottom line is that in the town of Lincoln, you have approximately 49 hectares of parkland. This is active parkland, the types of spaces that accommodate your playgrounds, your courts, your sports fields, a lot of your trails as well, and they certainly do have open space elements to them, but this is active parkland only. So it is supplemented, we recognize, by open space parks, including schools, schoolyards, and your conservation areas, which are well loved in your community as well. But you're currently providing nearly 2 hectares per 1,000 residents. So we talk about 1,000 residents as a good way to benchmark you against others. Which segues into this slide. That supply of active parkland, 2 hectares per 1,000, is well below most municipal targets. So we feel that your parkland needs will outpace what the town can acquire through the parkland, through the development process, meaning that you'll need to be looking at other ways to acquire land, and that might be through, I'll come to that on the next slide, but this, we just talk about, give you a little bit of sense of how you stack up against similar size communities. That graph will show where your 2 hectares per 1,000 lines up with others. Our benchmarking of other communities has them around 3.5 hectares per 1,000. You're about 2. And the larger, more urban communities tend to have less parkland per capita, but you're even below that particular benchmark. So some key recommendations relative to that. We're recommending just really a 10% increase in your parkland provision rate from 2 hectares at current to 2.2. So it may not seem like a lot, but we feel that that's substantial enough to address a lot of the needs that are forecasted within the plan. In particular, it addressed current gaps, growing needs around sports parks, around neighborhood park development, around your waterfront destination park in Prudhome's, urban parks, and a parkland gap in Vineland and Jordan area. We estimate that half of this parkland, so it amounts to about 20 hectares of land over the next 20 years. So 20 and 20. We estimate at a high level that about half of that would be coming to you through the development process. And we say that knowing that a lot of the Planning Act provisions around parkland are currently in flux as they change through some new legislation. But that would leave about 10 hectares to be acquired through other means. And the plan recommends a strategic approach by maximizing and expanding your existing parks first. So as you're seeking opportunities to fill that void, look at what you have and strategic opportunities to expand on those. So you have many tools in your toolbox as it comes to how you can use and deliver on the plan itself. We recommend that you consider alternate funding and cost-sharing approaches. You're doing this as of right, but it's important to underscore the fact that there are other means beyond growth-related funding to achieve your goals. So anything from establishing cost recovery levels, using surcharges, fundraising, grants, partnerships, sponsorships, and more. A reminder that good financial planning also means assessing impacts on service levels and the operating budget prior to approving major capital budgets. And also using this master plan, which is really the goal here, using this master plan as a guide for developing your annual and long-range budgets and related studies. So in terms of our financial plan, and it's embellished in more detail within the body itself of the report, but it's important to understand that it aligns with your recent 2018 DC study, that the capital cost estimates that have been prepared for new projects identified within the master plan, so these are projects that are not currently within your 2018 DC study. This amounts to $13.6 million over the course of 10 plus years. And as well, the majority of the plan's recommendations do not require new funding. So of 90 recommendations, the large majority don't require, many of them are operational, and many of them have existing and allocated funding sources for them. So out of that 13.6 million, we do have a bit of a changing landscape. That'll be the next slide. Some of them might become eligible to be funded through your community benefits charges. So a couple things as we roll this plan out to council, and we understand you're probably well aware of a couple of these items, but we have the regional government review which is ongoing. The importance of having a master plan in place, I guess, before that, before any sort of shifting sands, is we have a better sense of what the town of Lincoln community is seeking. And then Bill 108, long story short, this is really affecting the number of acts, but your DC Act, it's changing development charges to community benefits charges, and it's also changing some of the policy relative to parkland dedication. Some of the regulations have been recently rolled out, others still don't have any real definition to them. So we're continuing, and we have Byron Tan from Watson and Associates on hand to assist with any questions that you may have on this, but we're continuing to assess impacts and will as the details become more available.
So in terms of next steps, this document is really foundational for our department as well as the entire town to move forward some exciting work that we'd like to do. We're here this evening to seek your approval and endorsement moving forward. If we receive that this evening, our next step would be to transition our project team that we've been working with for the last year on this project into an implementation and action team. We'd like to develop an executive summary with the help of our communications department. That would be similar to what you would have seen for the economic development strategy. It was a much more reader-friendly, palatable version of a lot of information, and we'd be developing that for the community. Certainly they'd have access to the entire document, but we think that something a little bit more brief would be helpful for them, about 20 pages in length, so that would be something we'd look to do this fall. And you as council could expect that we'd be back here every year reporting on the achievements from the master plan. So an annual report card delivery would be something that we would like to commit to as a team as well. I'd like to just highlight a few of the contributors. There were a lot of people that contributed from the community, but also a lot of staff as well as our consultancy team. So a number of staff are here this evening to support the project and put a lot of work and effort and time and thought into it. This development, it was not just community services, it was really a cross-departmental project, so we're very proud of that. We also had Lisa Gallant, who you met last month from the Niagara Region Public Health Department, participate as well on the steering committee. Additionally, Town Council, we're very thankful for the budget to be able to do this project. As I mentioned, it's foundational to the work that we do. It's our roadmap moving forward. It's your roadmap moving forward when you decision make on what projects will be funded and how they're implemented. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Langlois as well as Joanna Campbell, who works at Monteith Brown, who's not able to be here this evening, but worked tremendously hard on this project, as well as Claire from Tucker Reed and Associates, Andy from Wiccan's Green Space Consultants, and of course Byron Tan and his team at Watson and Associates. So at this point, we're happy to answer any questions. As Mr. Langlois indicated, if there's anything specific to the DC changes or the community benefits charges, we will invite Mr. Tan to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Byron. There is no doubt that, as you mentioned, this is a foundational document for the people in the audience, from the public tonight. You know, this is a project that we started, I believe we launched it last June of 2018, so it's been a year we've been waiting for this document, and you know, it's very fulsome, and I think you've nailed it, that this is a foundational document. So at this point, I will open it up. Are there any questions from council? Councilor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll echo your comments to Sarah and Steve and to the whole team, as well as the consultants that aren't here, the town staff that was involved, and particularly those residents and stakeholders that participated. You know, I think that those folks are the key to get us to where we are today, and it is a wonderfully complete evaluation of where we are and where we need to go. So it is, not only that, it's a huge document. Like, it is a lot to get through. This is a nice summary, and I personally have not got through it all. I did get through the summary that's included in it, but I plan to get through the rest of the document. The question I would have maybe for you, Stephen, is more clarification on how we rate these projects, and a little bit confused on when I see a priority high and then I see 3 dots beside it. And And then I'll see a medium project and a dot right beside in the 2019 to 2022 timeframe. So how do we look at, and in fact, many of the items in this summary are that high with three dots, which kind of gets to where do we start? You know, that's, I guess maybe the question I have is, it seems like there's so much that's high and needed right now.
It's a great question through you, Mr. Chair. The good news is your staff are doing a lot of these things already. So there's 90 recommendations. Many of them you'll find, you use terminology, continue to. It's important to have those in writing because it continues to, it provides that ongoing guidance to staff and to administration to make sure that, to focus their priorities. So many of these are occurring. Those that have three dots really just suggest that they're ongoing best practices. So you're going to be doing them as of right, as a general, as part of your general course of business. So those that, they're not one-time type of events. You're not building a facility, rather you're coordinating with groups or you're seeking grant applications. So that's something that you're going to continue to do over the course of time. As it relates to priorities, what you'll find is the three columns are aligned with your terms of council. So the first column is for this term of council, 19 to 22 or thereabouts. And how I would take it is focus on that first column for this term, with a view towards certainly any of the bigger ticket items or the ones that require some advanced planning. But focus on that first column and those that are high priorities. And those that you don't get to for one reason or another, and we recognize that this is a dynamic plan. You know, there's always going to be a little bit of shifting, but that's the way it was intended to be presented. They've been prioritized based on what we've heard from your community, and the more times things came up in our assessment through, you know, it checks a box. The community, community support, yes. Your demographic support, yes. Is it on trend? Yes. Do we see that there's a gap? Yes. Those are the high priority items. But certainly it's hard because it's hard to come up with low priorities and put them in a plan, because we believe very strongly in everything in this plan will contribute to meeting its goals.
Through you, Mr. Chair, maybe a question through to Sarah. In the next steps, I'm wondering if, and I heard this is a 10-year plan, I'm wondering if there's any thought to laying this out over 10 years, as far as, you know, year one, here's the projects, and coming back with, and maybe it's not 10 years, maybe, okay, here's what we're going to do for the next 4 years, you know, or through this, you know, this first set of years, here's the ones we've identified, to come back with, here's year one, here's year two, here's year three. Is that what you're thinking?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, that's absolutely what the first task of the implementation team will be, to identify what the priorities are for this term of council based on what's being recommended in the plan. So we'll be laying that out. We can certainly bring that back if that's a request that you have. We'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I think it would make sense. Maybe it's at budget time, I don't know, but you know, maybe we can look at that window and see, okay, if we've got a project that's near and dear to us, does it hit the list? And if it hits, when does it hit the list? And we can share that with those that it will affect the most.
Through
I
you,
guess.
Mr. Chair, the councillor, it'll be really, for us, it'll be about aligning the 10-year capital plan to the recommendations that are in here, to the DC and
Right,
through the budget
right.
process. So yes, it'll be aligning all of that in a perfect storm, if you will, to get the projects off the ground.
And Mr. Chair, if I just have a comment, interesting analysis on the shortage of parks in our community, and you know, thinking about the last at least 4 years and the number of developments that have come along and taking cash in lieu, and wondering if, in fact, we need to think about that now going forward as far as when new developments come through, is cash in lieu the first option? Or should we be pushing for more parks? And I understand that there are many times where there is a park nearby, and we've been able to manage it that way, but I think we really got to be critical of our decision on not taking advantage of a park. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Michalak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the presenters. I echo a lot of the sentiments that Councillor McPherson stated. I was a little bit surprised by that. This is the town's first comprehensive study for parks. It's extremely difficult to know what you have when you haven't taken a look at what you currently have or what you need moving forward. So, with regards to partnerships with school boards, like I see a lot of parks at schools, sports facilities, soccer fields, that sort of thing. Other municipalities, how do they form these sort of partnerships? Is this something we should be looking at more? When I was looking at our inventory, I noticed that there was no identified, schools that we could be perhaps sharing cost with.
Through the chair to Councillor Michalak, we do currently use a number of school fields specifically at different times of the year. It depends on what time of the year it is, but we do have some formalized agreements and some less formal that we'll be looking to formalize as we move forward. So yes, we are using school fields, but they don't count towards our municipal parkland. So that's really where that number, I think Steve did reference that number is really just what we own. So it does not include NPCA lands or school fields. But yes, we do have some existing agreements with schools already, both in the public board as well as some of the private schools in the community. Some of those are reciprocating agreements where they utilize ice time and we utilize fields when we need them. So that's always something that we're looking to expand and enhance. However, as Mr. Langlois mentioned, we don't have control over those fields or the usage of those fields. So it is a little bit limiting sometimes where if they're not available or, there's maintenance issues, we'd have to be subject to that. So it could affect our programming potentially as well. But we've been working with our user groups for quite some time to help them ensure that they have access to fields readily.
And just one more question through you. The other municipalities listed in this report that identifies the number of hectares per 1,000 people, do those municipalities include partnerships in their data with formalized agreements with schools? Like, just trying to make sure the numbers are accurate with regards to our inventory and others, their inventory.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, these benchmarking exercises are always difficult to get to apples. What we pulled are all master plans that we've worked, communities that we've done master plans for in the last 5 years. So we know the methodology is identical towards identifying what's a park, what's an open space. Every community has a different form of, we'll call it partnership. It's kind of, like the town here. I mean, some formal, some less formal. Schools are in one hand sort of seen as an underutilized resource, but for the challenges that Sarah outlined, those are very real challenges. Most communities, they want to get the soccer groups on them, but the municipalities are not responsible for the maintenance, which creates this real challenge of providing a quality playing surface. So I use that as one example, but those communities that are having the best success are those that might involve a capital project around a dedicated type of amenity, like a sports field or a track or a tennis complex, where they can define the parameters and who's responsible for what, rather than just, if it's a schoolyard during the day, it's a park at night. Those are challenging circumstances that don't really provide, I think, true parkland to your community when they need it in the form that they need it. So it's a little bit of everything. Each community deals with it as they can.
Okay. Great report. I like it. I think it's a great document for us to work on when we're planning in the future. terrific. Thank you.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. I think all of my questions have been answered, but I did read it, the entire document, and it was excellent. It was very interesting. There were a lot of things that I didn't quite know, and some aha moments for me. But it was fantastic, and the team who worked on it, kudos to you for the product. I'm very happy with the result. When I saw the 90 priorities, I was a little wow, but now, when you see it broken down terms, and there'll be further prioritization of what we do in those terms. But it was a little overwhelming at first to see all of them, because there are a lot. Some easier, quick things I think that we can do. I have to mention, very happy to see a Camden Park. I have to put that out there. And dog leash park one day. So those are things that we heard people saying that they were, very interested in having. As far as any questions for you, I think they've been answered about how we're going to prioritize. And the parks, the amount of park space. I was really surprised by that, because I had the feeling that we have a lot of park space in Lincoln. So I was a little surprised by that. And was the park space at Prudham's added into that number? Is that accounted for or not? Because it's quite a large park space that will be happening there at that development.
Sure, just through you, Mr. Chair. Nothing that has, if it hasn't been dedicated to the
Right.
municipality, is not included. We know it's coming, as are a few other ongoing developments that will help to contribute to that 20 hectares.
Right. So I think, as Councillor McPherson said, moving forward, we'll need to be careful with developments that are coming in the parkland space and what's happening with that. Because I really didn't realize, I thought we actually had an abundance of park space, so I was a little surprised by that point. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. Next, we have Councillor Rinjima.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. Thank you very much for the presentation. And what's really clear is that you've gone out to the public and really engaged the public to the fullest extent that you could have. I think everybody's probably had a lot of opportunities to come and speak and provide their input over the last, 8, 9, 10 months, something like that? Yeah. So congratulations, thank you. I'm interested in your proposal to do an access and inclusion policy. I'm really interested in seeing what that's going to look like. Public art policy, that's going to be interesting as well. I comment about the prioritization of some of the items here. So Charles Daly Park on page 106, I think it is. Anyway, some of the improvements to Charles Daly Park have been rated as medium in priority. But the one thing I thought of was when I was there on Canada Day, everybody was just kind of going for the shade. Where's the shade, So, but then the next page, we say that it's going to be high priority for us to provide permanent shade structures within new and redeveloped destination parks, sports parks, and community parks. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I know at one point in the past, we had a seating plan created for Charles Daly Park, and we're doing so many things there and so many wonderful things there that I'd like to see that. And I think that's going to come out of our strategy that you're going to come up with, the comprehensive consolidated version of this that has action plans that are more, but I'd like to see that a little higher on the list. And one more comment I had is throughout tonight in our agenda, we have a proposal coming forward to name what we're currently referring to as Serena Park, Rotary Park. So throughout this document, I think we refer to it as Serena Park, and we never really actually came to that conclusion. So before we finalize the document, I think we change that, of course, depending on what we decide tonight, later on in the agenda. And if Mr. Chair, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Thank you. I do have a question about Bill 108. You were speaking about it earlier on, and you said that there's a proposal it proposes to I think it sort of consolidate charges sort of into one charge. I think I've sort of heard that. But one, you're saying to change, that it may be that development charges will now be called community benefits. Right now, I think in the Planning Act, community benefits are something that we as a municipality can ask a developer to, in exchange for a higher density proposal, to ask for some sort of community benefits. So is that something that's going to be sort of done away with under Bill 108, or how is that changing, do we know?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Rinjima, I think Mr. Tam would like to walk you through what that process will look like and the changes that are
Okay.
about to occur.
Thank you.
Good evening, through you, Mr. Chair. So for Bill 108, for your first comment, it will not be doing away with the development charges. It'll just be splitting it up. So you'll still have your current development charges by law. However, any services that are not related to water, wastewater, storm, roads, police, fire, transit, waste diversion, really stay within the DCA, whereas your outdoor, indoor recreation and libraries, and then any studies related to those services would be stripped out of the development charges bylaw and created within this community benefits charge. And that'll be based on a valuation percentage of the value prior to the building. And that would be effective as of January 1st, 2020, but you must have it in place by January 1st, 2021. To your point with intensification, or with the increased density for higher units, may you just rephrase that question again?
I think it's called community benefits or bonusing or something in the Planning Act, where we can ask for community benefits such as Parkland or whatever we, I think there's a little summation of what we as a municipality can ask for in exchange for a higher density proposal. So I'm wondering if that's still, maybe you don't know at this point, but whether that's still proposed to be in place under Bill 108.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you would be able to ask for any of those services under the community benefits charge. However, with that higher density proposal, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by
I can speak to that a little
Okay.
bit too,
Yeah.
if that's fine. They're essentially repealing all of this. This is section 37 of the Planning Act. It's now been repealed, and they're replacing it with some changes. It's no longer really tied to height and density, so a lot of the things that you would ask a developer for before, childcare, public art, streetscape improvements, that still remains, but now you have a recreation, library, your parks, the soft services that were within the DC, the funding associated with that gets combined now into this community benefits charge. The formulas around that are still not yet rolled out, so we don't really know what the impact is going to be. The provincial government has talked about it being revenue neutral, but it's also going to be tied to land value. So it's a changing landscape. It really and truly is. But it's important. I think that's where we have a master plan in place first, so we know what our priorities are. And it gives us a nice step to stand on when it comes time to preparing for the community benefits charge. And you can still get parkland at 5% of the land, of the site, or cash in lieu of it at 5%. That still remains. But if you also used for higher density development, there was a cash in lieu alternate rate, it was called, that is no longer available to you. So there's a lot of moving parts, but what you'll find is having these plans in place at least gets you at the table. It will now be a matter of trying to put it all into this pot and decide on what the priorities are with other soft services.
Okay, well, this document definitely is going to help us. Thank you. Thanks for answering my questions.
So I would have a number of questions on any other night, but we have a very heavy agenda here, so I'm just going to try to keep it to one question, maybe direct it to Steve, and if Sarah wants to jump in. So with regards to the developing of the sports strategy for the renewal at Jordan Lyons Park specifically, and I'll preface this by saying when we did the design and when we built the Fleming Center, we were probably dealt with a lot of feelings at the time that we should be building a twin pad arena at the Fleming Center, for a number of reasons, one of which we didn't get any funding from the federal government. So we made a decision at that time, during the design, it's 6 years ago now, to build a single pad arena. Things change, and, Brock University is now building a pad, and the Lincoln Minor Hockey is now amalgamating with West Lincoln and Grimsby. So that will change ice, but, at the end of the day, we have 2 pads in the town of Lincoln. I'm just curious as to, when you went out to the shareholders and the stakeholders, did you get a lot of feeling or a lot of input from people saying that we needed more ice surfaces? I'm just wondering what information you got from the people that you sat down with.
Thank you. To your question, Mr. Chair, we did speak with ice user groups in both, that use both of those facilities. The Jordan groups were very pleased with the ice and the access that they have, and they say it's the best ice in the region, so they're thankful for that. For those using the Fleming Center, they recognize that there is some pressure. I mean, that pressure is for that primetime ice, though, particularly Monday through Thursday, 6 o'clock till 10 o'clock at night. And with the changes to the amalgamation of the rep programs, it's a little bit harder to predict moving forward, but we collected their registration data. We used some metrics that we've had great success with in other communities and tried to project that forward. It's a sport that's growing, but not growing as fast as your population. So there is probably some pressure on some ice, but within the next 10 years, the recommendation is not to expand to a third ice pad.
If I may add, Chair, staff met just this afternoon actually with staff from West Lincoln and Grimsby to discuss the amalgamation and ice, and to ensure that we're working together and making sure that this larger group are serviced well. And so I echo the comments that Mr. Langlois has, that while we have not a shortage, but we're full at prime time, we certainly have an abundance of time during non-prime, and that was reflected in the other communities as well. It's not just us, it's them as well. So I don't think that we have enough interest at this point in time or demand to move forward with an additional pad. I think we're meeting the need quite well at this point in time.
Thank you. And I'll just finish by echoing Councillor Timmer's comments. And I think I mentioned this to Mr. Langlois in a presentation a few months ago, that I was glad to see that we're moving forward with possibly a dog pilot project. I think out of the 1,000 doors I knocked on during the election, I only had the door slammed in my face twice, and it was about dog parks. So glad to see that. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for all your work and for your presentation this evening. So we have a motion to receive for information Report CS 14-19 regarding the Town of Lincoln's draft Parks, Recreation, and Culture Master Plan, and to endorse and adopt the Town of Lincoln Draft Parks, Recreation, and Culture Master Plan, the recommendations and implementation strategy contained within. We will require a mover. Councillor Timmers. All in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. We will now move to item 7.2 on the agenda, CS-13-19, the proposed parkland naming for Serena Park. Are there any questions from council? Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I realize that we've got the executive from the Rotary Club here tonight, and I appreciate them coming out to the meeting. My question is through to the staff, and it's about the process. And if I look at this report, it looks like we're quite a ways down the road of the naming of this park, with a recommendation report as well as an MOU. And the Rotary Club is fantastic in making a contribution that they're making, but I really wonder, have we engaged the public in this process and, engage them in such a way that there is options, I guess. And I understand the list that has no names on it, but, I could come up with several names that would be historical, maybe, Fairgrounds Park, Central Park, there's Serena Park. I mean, there's several, and I think it's important that we get this right, that there is, a opportunity for all to participate in the naming, and, notwithstanding the Rotary and what they're doing specifically for this park, and I think there's opportunities to acknowledge the Rotary, specific maybe to the skate track or, plaques and things like that, but I really question, have we engaged the public in a way that we're not necessarily putting a name to it and saying, do you agree with this name?
I'm looking for someone from staff. I see Sarah putting on her microphone. Ms. Ain.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor McPherson. This is really the first step of the naming process. By no means after tonight is the park named officially. If you look on to page 2 of the report, it does identify that there were no names on the names reserve list at this time, which means no members of the public have put forward any names onto that list. However, that being said, after the report this evening, should you approve it, the next step would be to post a public notice. We have to do that per our policy for at least 21 days. Because there's a break of committee and council in August, it will be out longer than that. And then members of the public will have opportunity during that public notice period to provide a name or commentary if they want. And they would be able to come to a public meeting that would be held in September about the naming. So there is ample opportunity. It's actually more than 2 months' time before we would be back here to present to you any decision that you would have to make as a council, and you do have final discretion on the naming of the park.
Mr. Chair, there's no easy way to say this other than as soon as you put a name in the report, that becomes the name. That becomes the name that the staff is recommending that we go with. And it's really, you're looking for the public to say, no, that's not the name we want. We want another name. So I see this as leading the witness by stating in here, we've got an MOU and we've also got a name picked out. So, if we've not had public engagement that's on purpose public engagement, instead of, well, nobody's put a name on our names list, well, I'm not so sure a lot of people out there know we have a names list. So I'm suggesting that we go without a name in the report, saying that we're planning to potentially change the name of Serena Park. What would you like us to name it? And if it's Rotary, fabulous. If that's what the public comes back with. If it's something else, we accommodate the Rotary Club in a way that's appropriate for the contribution that they make. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Michalak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff, just looking at the investment that Rotary Park is making, it's based over 10 years. How binding? What happens? Is there a possibility, should there be a falling out or a change of heart or a change of mind where, we see, is it 100,000 over 10 years? What if after year 3, there's a decision made to, say, not follow through on that commitment? And I ask that similar to what happened with the Ice Dogs and what happened with that contribution. Is there any chance of that happening, or what?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Michalak. Firstly, if if this project does move forward and we do name the park after Rotary, we would be entering into a contractual arrangement with them, a legal obligation. Right now, the MOU is not legally binding in any way. It's simply an act of good faith, a good gesture, if you will, that they've expressed to us the desire to provide a significant amount of money towards the development of that piece of parkland. And so we would be moving into an agreement with the Rotary Club. We have no reason to believe that there would be any falling out of any sort. We've worked very well with them on the Rotary Bandshell project. They've been great stewards at Charles Daly Park, and their interest to do the same at Serena exists.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ain, for those comments. Councillor Rinjima.
Thank you, Chair Brunet. Our naming policy is, there's a little précis here under naming process that tells us what the process is that we go through to determine the name of a municipal facility. Is that comprehensive? Does that tell us everything, every step of the way that the policy, does that accurately tell us every step that we are supposed to take under that policy? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Ms.
Through
Ain.
Mr. Chair to Councillor Renjima, yes, that is the accurate process as per the policy.
Thank you. I'm also going to go to the director, Ms. McKay.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I think the challenge for us as staff, if you read that naming process, the first item on there is that the process will begin within 12 months after the town has acquired title. So that didn't happen 5 years ago when Fleming was completed and that open space was left as an open space or future parkland. So we're picking up as if it had somewhat, and it hasn't. So I just, this is the proper process to follow, but it wasn't followed there. So a list was not, a names reserve list did not exist for that open space at the time, and I suppose by default being Serena Street, people called it Serena Park.
Can I ask another question, Mr. Chair?
Absolutely.
So how is the names reserve list usually compiled? What process under that policy do we usually take to come up with that names reserve list?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Renjima, the Clerk's Department manages the names reserve list. That's their function. It's not housed in community services. And at this current time, the clerk has indicated that there is nobody on the list, no names, no suggestions. And that's all I know at this point in time. I can certainly connect you with the clerk, though, for further information if you require that.
I'm curious, I guess, further to Councillor McPherson's questions, whether there's anything in that policy that suggests that we post that reserve list on a website and invite input. I'm just, yeah, it doesn't sound like there is.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Renjima, the only provision that's noted in the policy is with respect to if a new name is suggested by the public, that we need to inform you as council. So every time a name is added to that list, a report would come to you notifying you of that. And currently there are no names on the list. So that's why you would have received no notifications.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no further discussion, we have a motion to receive for information report CS 13-19 regarding proposed parkland naming for Serena Park. To direct staff to provide public notice regarding council's intention to name its municipal open parkland adjacent to the Fleming Center, the Rotary Park. That council accept presentations and written submissions until September the 4th, 2019. To direct staff to schedule a public meeting regarding the intention to name a municipal facility on September 23rd, 2019, if required, and to direct staff to report back to Community Services and Infrastructure Committee on October the 9th, 2019, with final recommendations for council approval. We will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Timmers? All in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. We will now be considering item 7.3, FS-02-19, the 2018 Fire Department Annual Report. Chief Hudson.
Thank you, Chair Bernay, and good evening, members of council. Excuse me. It's my pleasure tonight to present the annual report for the fire department for 2018. And in that light, I thought I'd prepare a brief presentation just to highlight some of the highlights from last year and focus on some of our priorities for this coming year. So in terms of highlights, of course, we had the brand new Camden Fire Station, which is now open and operational. I think most of you attended the open house. Also, last year we took delivery of a new 13,000 liter water tanker truck, which also just happens to be in Camden as well. And that replaced a 21-year-old plus truck. And it's primarily based in Camden, but it does respond to all fires all throughout Lincoln. We saw a marked increase in fire prevention activities, particularly with respect to some of the development, some of the plans reviews, zoning reviews, that kind of thing. We've seen quite an uptick in that kind of work as well. We've seen a continuous focus on public education, community outreach. Last year, things like Touch a Truck, we had trucks. Hillary Bald Park, we have our Hot Fire Fridays. That seems to be a big hit in the community. Of course, the Fire Prevention Week open house, and we've been participating now with the summer camp program. As you may recall, we adopted the new Niagara West Emergency Management Program last year, and part and parcel to that is we conducted a very large full-scale multi-agency mock disaster to test the new plan. So in terms of some of our response statistics last year, we're happy to report no fire fatalities or serious injuries. We saved over $5 million in property compared to about 1.8 in fire loss, which is up a little bit from the previous year. We had 1,021 responses, which is a little decrease over last year. We continued with the day group pilot project during the summer months to ensure we had sufficient coverage to respond during the day, during the week. We are finding, and we'll address this a little bit further a little later on, we're continuing to see a challenge in meeting some of our response requirements, particularly in the urban areas. The rural areas, I think we're doing okay, but the urban areas continue to pose a challenge for us. And I'm also happy to report that we're the third lowest fire service cost per capita in the Niagara region. So what are we doing this year? We continue to do in fire prevention code enforcement. We still have a lot of work to do in fire planning and development. We are looking at strategies to accommodate some of these significant demands on our workload. We're talking, and it was presented in the budget, to contract some services to get some additional help from Grimsby. And we're also looking at process review enhancement, just to see if we can streamline the process and work a little bit faster and smarter and be a little bit more customer service focused to speed up some of these processes. We continue to do our mandatory complaint and request inspections as the law requires. Similarly, vulnerable occupancies, we have a high number in Lincoln. We actually added one last year, so we're up to 29 of those, which is actually unusually high given the size of our municipality. We continue with the migrant housing inspections. We have about 115 buildings in town. Again, that's fairly high in comparison with other municipalities. And that represents roughly about 1,500 migrant workers that come to our town. And something new is there's a new regulation that requires us to do annual community risk assessments. As of this month, we have to start doing that every year. In terms of the fire safety education component, last year we saw actually a very, very disappointing, only a 68% compliance rate for people with smoke alarms in their homes, and very troubled by that. So again, we're focusing our efforts on bringing it up, well, hopefully to 100%, but we really want to focus on that. Now that we're doing the community risk assessments, we want to align our public education activities to where we see the risk, and we are seeing particular focus on some of the seniors groups as well as school-aged children to kind of focus on some of our target areas. And again, we want to maintain our presence in community like we have in the past. In terms of emergency services, our priority is to provide quality fire protection service to the community, as always, with our dedicated volunteer firefighters. Again, we have to comply with a myriad of provincial legislation, standards, and the town bylaw. We actually have another mandatory regulation that's coming on board as of January, and that's mandatory public reporting of some of our response statistics in terms of intervention times, response times, that kind of thing. So not only do we have to report these to the province, but we're required every year to report these to council. So it becomes public knowledge, and people really have a sense of the real capabilities of the fire department, because they have found in other communities that people assume that fire department have certain capabilities when they really don't. So this really holds the fire department and the municipality accountable for providing the level of service that they say they are. And again, part and parcel to that, we are doing the community risk assessment versus our standards of cover. So, response times are one issue, but we want to make sure we have sufficient numbers of firefighters arriving on scene. And of course, as always, we're looking at strategies to actually preserve the volunteer firefighting model just as long as we possibly can, because the alternative of career firefighters is very, very expensive. So we are looking at continuing the day crew during the day, and continue to look at opportunities for shared services and automatic aid agreements, which we have a few in place already. So I spoke to you a little bit about the standards of cover and some of the statistics. I have a very short little video clip here that kind of explains it fairly nicely. And there's no video, there's no sound. There we go. Try it again.
Your house is on fire. It's your worst nightmare. In just 3 minutes, a fire can grow 16 times larger than when it started, and it continues to grow bigger and faster every second. Once the clock starts ticking, there's a shrinking window of opportunity to save lives and property. You want a full crew of firefighters to put it out quickly, or you may suffer a catastrophic loss. But how many are enough? 50, 20, 40? How do you decide? Fortunately, there's an internationally recognized industry standard. It's called Nfpa 1710, and it's based on scientific evidence and research that establishes how many firefighters are needed to put out each fire and rescue anyone trapped. At a fire scene, you want a firefighter doing every job that needs to be done to save you and your house. And at a fire, there's a lot that needs to be done, like stretching the hose, hooking to a hydrant, searching for trapped people, venting the hot gases, and much more. For a low-hazard single-family house fire, NFPA 1710 specifies a minimum of 15 firefighters dispatched in the initial alarm. At an open-air strip shopping center or garden apartment fire, the standard specifies a minimum of 28 firefighters dispatched in the first alarm. And for fires in high-rise buildings at least 7 stories tall, the data show that the initial dispatch should be for a minimum of 43 firefighters, and that fire departments should send additional firefighters to situations that are beyond the capability of the initial alarm. Regardless of the type of property, 1710 also sets the time of arrival on scene within 4 minutes for the first engine with 4 firefighters. The 1710 standard for both response time and crew size is based on scientific evidence, not opinion. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, known as NIST, and its partners conducted extensive research to document the optimal crew sizes for various types of structures. As a decision maker, you and firefighters share a common goal. Everyone gets out alive. So when a house is on fire, just remember it takes a minimum of 15 firefighters to put it out. And the quicker the response time, the better the outcome for everyone.
All right. So as you saw there, that's what basically the standards are based on, is that standard. The 1720, as you saw in the clip, is the one for volunteer firefighters, and although the number of firefighters is the same, the time is a little bit different because they recognize that the volunteer firefighters have to get to the station first, then take the truck. So there's a 5-minute additional time component there. So in terms of the types of fires we do, we can and do deploy 15 firefighters to house fires, as in the standard. The other types of fires, we can, the kind of the mid-range with the 28 firefighters, we can, that's stretching it. But some of the bigger things, and as soon as we see some high-rise buildings go up in town, we will require 43. But the good news is we do have automatic aid agreements with some other neighboring municipalities, so we would actually be able to achieve that. So it's good news. All right, very quickly then, just kind of moving on. In terms of training, we're continuing to train our cohort of 15 firefighters, new recruits we had from last year. And by the end of this year, they'll be fully certified as Firefighter 1 and 2 and their hazardous material, core operations. We continue with the ongoing firefighter training program. Every firefighter has to put in 53 hours each year. Some officer development things we're doing to make sure we have supervisors and some of the officers in command competent and well-versed in what they're supposed to do. And we continue to partner with Grimsby to use their West Niagara training facility at their fire station on the mountain. So this year we will be accepting delivery of a new rescue pumper, again for Camden. That should be within the next few weeks, actually. We're starting to do site works and plans for the new Vineland fire station, which it was identified as necessary for Prudhome's. As part of a corporate project with a number of different departments, we're looking at enhancing our municipal radio system. And again, we're looking at some upgrades to our emergency operations center. And along with that, we've hired the emergency management coordinator. We're implementing the joint plan. We continue to work with some of our other municipalities around the area to bring some more players on board. We're revising the plan, doing training. We'll do another actual annual exercise this year and make sure we get compliance with the legislation again this year. So that's my presentation. I think you all were provided a copy with the actual annual report, and so I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chief Hudson. First up, I have Councillor Rinjema.
Thank you, Chair Brune. Thank you, Chief Hudson, for your presentation. A few years ago, I think you remember it, I've been to a few different seminars and day learning sessions that have gone on for different firefighting-related initiatives in the community over the last 2 terms of council. And one of them you showed a video, and that's what I thought this was going to be, and it really drove it home. And so we know that prevention and education are key. When you start with that, it flows out to less fires, less problems, less costs in the long run. That video showed a house going up. So, I think it was a candle tipped over on the main floor, and there was a camera in the corner, and the candle tipped over onto a chair, a wicker chair, and the whole house went up. And it was a reenactment of a fire, of an actual fire. And I think even the neighboring, the house next door, it was a semi. The house next door was gone also within like 5 minutes or something. So, and when I commented on that, you did say that some updates to firewalls and sprinkler systems, et cetera, over time, maybe your average house wouldn't go up that quickly, but it went up really, really fast. And that really drove it home for me, how important prevention, education, and response time are. I'm wondering if you have access to that video, if we can share it on social media.
Right, through you, Chair. Yes, we can certainly do that. Yeah, it was very thought-provoking video, and they made a slight mention to it in this video. Said you have 3 minutes before you have to start to intervene with a fire. And with today's building construction and the materials they're using today, it's scary how fast it'll burn. That's why we focus on having working smoke alarms, because that's really, you only have a few minutes to be warned and be able to get out. So that's why it's so disappointing to see so many people that don't heed that word. So, but yeah, we can certainly make that video available. So.
Can I ask one more question, Mr. Chair? So do you have any, can you speculate as to why our compliance, I guess, with smoke alarms has gone down or does go down at times? Do people just get too busy? What is it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I wish I had the answer to that. I think part of the issue this past year is we sampled a greater number of homes. I think we hit close to 900 homes last year, and that was one of the tasks the day crew we had visited homes door to door. So it could be a function of the sample size. Other than that, it's just a variety of reasons. Just you can't say that nobody knows about it, because I don't think that can possibly be the case. I think it's maybe just everybody's busy, perhaps a little bit of apathy, I'll get around to it kind of thing, where they don't perhaps recognize the importance of it and give the priority it perhaps should. So.
Yeah, I know we were giving them out at one time. We do that now and then, I think once a year or something, right?
Yeah, through you, we do have various campaigns, and every time we go to a call, whether it's a medical call or an alarm call, we always check before we leave, make sure they have a working smoke alarm in every house we visit. You heard about community outreach campaigns we've had. We try to drive home the message, and clearly we have some work to do still. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Brunette. Thanks, Chief Hudson, for the report. Just a couple of questions on page 16 of the report, where you got the pie chart there for the emergency responses by incident type. Just a question about the medical part. It's 20%, and you mentioned in the preamble there about it coming down from 2016. What was it then, and what and does this represent then the 20% that we feel that the fire department needs to be there, or is it still work to be done in that number?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have been working with Niagara EMS to make sure that the calls the fire department respond to are the right kinds of calls. So we're not deploying resources needlessly. And I think you'll see Niagara EMS actually this year has rolled out a new process, a new dispatching protocol for their own people as well. So really, the director of EMS for Niagara, he used the analogy that the police and fire kind of tailor their response to what the nature of the call is. For example, they don't send the SWAT team and all the big guns to every single call if it's a lost bicycle call, where they'll send one officer or they'll ramp it up as need be. Fire obviously does the same, whereas for years, EMS stated that they would just send an ambulance out to everything, whether or not they needed it. And so they're looking at, what kind of resources are really needed, perhaps some more community involvement. They have some specialized units coming on board. So we're part of that. We're part of the whole pre-hospital emergency care system. And as they refine their systems, which they have already, we'll see some more improvements this year as well. So I think you'll see again this year a drop. They'll put the focus on going to calls that are really necessary, life and death, true life and death, as much as they can tell. And some of the less urgent calls, will get, called back or pulled away from, which, it just goes to the efficiency and the effectiveness of the whole system.
And one more question, if I may, Chair Brunei. Just right beside it again, Chief Hudson, just the false alarms, like is there I kind of attracted those two because they're the two biggest chunks of that pie, and maybe just fill us in a little bit, or is there more than frustration in that number? Or?
That is a frustration. We do have means in place to, I'm not going to say penalize, but encourage the compliance with fire code in particular, and make sure that things are in place. There's a number of different reasons for false alarms, and they're all kind of lumped in together. One particular area that we struggle with is it's called a human perceived emergency, where somebody says, "Oh, I see a fire out there," and they send out the trucks to the fire. It turns out it's really nothing. Somebody's got a backyard barbecue and somebody saw smoke. So that's really a false alarm. There was no emergency, so it gets classified as a human perceived. And living along the highway, we get quite a few of those as well. So, and that's a very difficult one to correct. But the ones where it's an actual, problem with the automatic alarm system or that kind of thing, we work with them to correct the problem, and they have a couple of chances at it, and then they start, getting fees and charges for our cost recovery. But yes, that's certainly one of the areas. I'd like to see that at zero if we possibly could, because every one of those is, a waste of resources.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. I think the Ward 4 councillors are literally on the exact same page, and Councillor Reimer asked my exact question. So I had concerns around all those false alarms as well. I thought that was a huge number. I was thinking of the cost involved of sending out a crew to a false alarm, but so I don't have any other questions at this point, other than I think it was a great report, and thank you very much for all the information and bring it forward. Appreciate it.
Councillor Michalak.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. Through you to the chief. Just page 29 of the report. I'm curious with regards to the average emergency response cost was $824.09 per incident. Is that high, low? What's the average? Like that's on our end, right? That was the cost each time for our end.
So yes,
as a municipality.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's for us. That is very simple calculation. We just divided what our budget is for, the response component of it, the pay for the firefighters going out, the wear and tear on the trucks, that kind of thing, by the number of calls, and that's the number that bubbles through. And that varies a little bit up and down each year. It depends on the nature of the calls. Some calls are more expansive, they need more trucks. Some are a little less. And it's hard to compare apples to apples with municipalities because there's a number of different variables.
Just trying to get an idea if we're, if we're higher or lower than, normal, if it's, typical for any municipality or, where we are on that spectrum.
And that's, I think one of the comparators is we get reimbursed for our calls on the Queen Elizabeth Way from the Minister of Transportation, and they pay a little bit more than half of that. So we're it's actually a losing proposition to going out on the highway. And I hear that from most of my colleagues that it doesn't really cover the cost, so which leads me to believe that we're all very similar in terms of comparative values.
I was going to ask another question through you.
Excuse me.
If if you don't mind. And on that same page, what the heck? Besides the full-time aspect, how does it range so much from per capita from $62 to $259? What are we short on something? Are we is the municipality at 62? Are they short, extremely deficit on something, or what?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think you'll find that every one of them that is significantly higher has career firefighters. So that's a huge component of it, and that's, I made that comment earlier on maintaining the volunteer fire system just as long as we can to keep us down in the bottom half of the page here. And then you look at, start to drill down and you look at some of the areas involved, because the bigger the area, the more fire stations you have. So for instance, if you look at Lincoln versus West Lincoln, we have 4 fire stations. They have 2.
Oh, okay. There you go.
So we have probably at least twice as many firefighters. We have obviously twice as many fire stations and trucks and all the costs that are associated with that. And we also get a lot more calls in West Lincoln.
Okay, so that, all right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Chief, I just had one question. I actually made a note of it when I was going through the report, and then not knowing you were going to show the video, it just reinforced me to ask this question. And maybe I'm reading the chart wrong, but on page 19, it talks about the firefighter turnout, and the table shows the average firefighter turnout per call for each station. So if I'm reading this correctly, it appears that based on 2018 numbers, we're meeting the average firefighter turnout in stations 2, 3, and 4. But in Fire Station 1, we are falling short.
To you, Mr. Chair, yes, that is true. I think any of the challenges we have in terms of the response, the deployment of firefighters, we're seeing Station 1 has the biggest challenge because they're the busiest. And that was one of the main reasons we implemented the day crew for part of the year. And it really depends on what time of the day the calls come in and the availability of the firefighters. You know, we structure our hiring process to try to attract people, you know, who are available throughout the entire day. You know, it's great if we have people that live and work in town or on shift work, that kind of thing. Can't always count on it. And the other piece to this is it's perhaps a little misleading in that if 14 is minimum required to go to an actual working structure fire, I think what we'll find if the firefighters hear that it's a lesser call, like perhaps a medical call that needs fewer people, it's perhaps investigate a burn complaint, they choose not to leave work for those calls.
Right.
Particularly at Station 1, they're pressing close to 500 calls a year, and you know, it'd be nice if that was all evened out across the year, but unfortunately, you know, they'll get some days where they have 4, 5, 6, 7 calls, and they just simply can't leave work that many times. So I think that's part of it, but the good thing about Lincoln is because we have a multi-station response strategy to take resources from different areas of town, then we really haven't had an issue overall assembling enough people, ultimately on the scene. Our biggest problem is getting them there in a timely fashion.
Right. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate the report. So we have a motion to receive the 2018 Fire Department Annual Report for information, and we will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Reimer. All in favor? And that is carried. The next item on the agenda, we are now considering item 7.4, PW 16-19, the cleaning and inspection services for the Town of Lincoln Sanitary Sewer System Project Award. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, have a motion to receive and file PW 16-19, the cleaning and inspection services for the Town of Lincoln Sanitary Sewer System Project Award, and to approve the firm of Pipe Tech Infrastructure Services to be retained for sanitary sewer cleaning and inspection services at a cost of $462,829.08. And approve the firm of R.V. Anderson Associates Limited to be retained for contract administration and site services at a cost of $79,580. And to approve the mayor and the town clerk to sign and seal the contract documents on behalf of the municipality. We will require a mover for the motion. Councillor McPherson. All in favor? And that is carried. Next item on the agenda, we are now considering item 7.5, PW-17-19, the traffic bylaw amendments for the Cherry Heights subdivision. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Rinjima.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I was looking at on page, the bylaw on page 520, and I'm just want to clarify one thing. If I look at the map on page 519 and compare it to what it says in the bylaw proposes to, number one, to delete the provision that parking be prohibited on the west side of Cherry Heights Boulevard from King to Eastdale Drive. So that's coming out. And then on number two, it proposes that parking be prohibited from Cherry Heights Boulevard on the west, on Cherry Heights Boulevard on the west side from King Street to Ashby Drive. But on the map, I don't see it dotted in red on the west side. So to me, when I look at the map, it looks like you can park on either side of Cherry Heights Boulevard from King up to Eastdale. Is that just I think maybe the red dotted line needs to be put in there, and that's just a miss. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't see our bylaw officer here this evening, but I'm going to go to Director Graham from Public Works.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. You're exactly right, and thanks for pointing that out. The red line is missing on the map there, so.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive and file the traffic bylaw amendments for the Cherry Heights subdivision report PW-17-19, to approve the proposed bylaw for the stop sign locations in Appendix B, to approve the proposed bylaw for the on-street parking restrictions in Appendix C, and to amend the Town of Lincoln Traffic and Parking Bylaw 89-2000, 89-28, Schedule C and P. We will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Rinjima, all in favor? And that is carried. Next item, we are now considering item 7.6, PW 18-19, the South Service Road Sidewalk Construction Project Award. Are there any questions from council? Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No question, just a comment. You know, that this has been a project that has been talked about for a while. Very, very pleased to see it now coming to fruition. It will do a wonderful job of making that connection from the parking lot at the bus station to Ontario Street a whole lot safer, you know, a lot more light, and you know, I think it also sends a nice message to the GO folks that, you know, we're serious about GO, and we're serious about you know, making the bus a successful venture. I will say I'm a little bit shocked by the sticker price on this thing. I mean, it seems to be, and I think about when we came into our term of council last term and we were spending roughly $1 million on all of our roads, and this particular little project is half of that. But I'm not gonna push on that. It's nice that the region is splitting it with us, and just let's get moving. Great little project, and another one that has been requested and will now be done. Nice work.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. I too am really pleased to see that this is gonna happen. I've seen people walking along, Ontario Street towards the Go Bus, and I've also seen them on the South Service Road. And I guess what my question is to, Director Dave Graham. I know the speed has been lowered on Ontario Street from the tracks to the South Service Road. I'm wondering about the speed on the South Service Road. Has there been any change there?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, it was reduced last year. It used to be 80 kilometers an hour, and we had the region reduce it to 60. So we had it reduced down to 60 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, I remember the discussion. I just didn't know if it was going to 50, so it's at a 60. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. I didn't see it in the report, so thank you very much, Mr. Graham.
Seeing no further questions, I agree with Councillor McPherson's comments. You know, there's no doubt that when we first started talking about this at Active Transportation 2 years ago, you know, we were talking about connectivity and getting a sidewalk there. But over the last couple of years, there's no doubt that with the region's involvement, this project has evolved to lighting from a security standpoint, drainage. There's a culvert involved, so it's morphed into a much bigger project. And for the public, I mean, it's all taxpayer money. But you know, you will hear the number that we will announce in the motion. The town share in this is 200. No, the town cost share 208,000. Is that correct, Director Graham?
Through Mr. Chairman, yes, and it's funded by the development charge reserves too.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Director. So we have a motion to receive and file report PW-18-19, the South Service Road Sidewalk Construction Project Award, to approve the contract for the South Service Road Sidewalk Construction Project for the tender amount of $379,500, excluding HST, to Steed and Evans Limited, to approve the firm of MGM Consulting be retained to provide engineering services at a cost of $29,930, and to approve the mayor and town clerk to sign and seal the contract documents on behalf of the municipality. And we will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Timmers, all in favor? And that is carried. Next item, we are now considering item 7.7, PW-19-19 King Street Water Main Award. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive and file report PW-19-19 for the King Street Water Main Project Award, and to approve the contract for the King Street Water Main Project for the tender amount of $1,344,830, excluding HST, to Catalina Excavating, Inc., and to approve the firm of Carey T. Howe Engineering to be retained to provide engineering services at a cost of $62,460, and to approve the funding from the Water Reserve Fund to cover the additional estimated project costs, and approve the town and clerk to sign and seal the contract documents on behalf of the municipality. We will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Reimer, all in favor? And that is carried. Next item, we will be considering item 7.8, PW-20-19, the Emergency Flooding Update, Lakeshore Roads. Do staff have any comments to this?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions on the report. I know there's some residents here tonight that are here in interest of the section of Lakeshore Road east of Martin Road. As an update on that particular situation, I'm happy to let council know that staff currently have a request for proposal out to the market to retain an engineering consultant to help us look at a study to determine a plan on how we can do a more permanent shoreline protection solution for that area. So we expect those proposals to come back end of July and likely be in a position to bring committee some information in September to award that consulting exercise so we can get started on that.
Thank you, Director Graham. Before I go to council for any questions, I'm just going to turn to our CAO, Mr. Karkopoulos.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, just a few comments, and I think anytime we have residents here in the crowd, I think it is, important that we do speak to this. I mean, what you've got before you is a recommendation really speaking to designating this an emergency, and I think if you talk to any one of these residents, they would absolutely tell you this is an emergency, this is something that severely impacts their livelihoods, their well-beings. Director Graham and I were on site at one particular point in time, and we were talking to a couple who weren't able to get some basic necessities to their home during this particular time, and were worried about the potential of not having enough gas and other sorts of things so that they could continue to keep air conditioning running, their fridges going, accessing their properties and maintaining, I think, the health that we want in every one of our residents. So I think it's important to highlight that the recommendation here is to designate this an emergency for the purposes of receiving what we call MDRAP, and that is the Municipal Disaster Recovery Assistance Program. You see there a cost in excess of $433,000, which is 3%, and just the threshold that we need to be at in order to make that declaration. Staff have continued to have dialogue with senior levels of government on this particular issue. We've shared detailed notes, detailed photographs, detailed videos, both from an aerial perspective and an on-land perspective. And so what you've got before you, as I highlighted, really is that next step in the process so that we can start the work that's required. And I think as we've committed to residents, as council's committed on numerous occasions, we need to find a long-term appropriate solution so this doesn't continue to happen.
Thank you, Mr. CAO, for that insight, not only for council, but for the public here this evening. So we have a motion to receive and file report. You're absolutely right. My error. I'm going to go to council and Councillor Mikulak. Questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff, regarding $50,000 for Charles Daly Boardwalk repairs, do we have a plan for that? What's the $50,000 going to do?
Through you, Mr. Chair, once the water levels drop, we have to assess where we can put the boardwalk back, and we're going to be needing to properly repair the boardwalk, properly anchor the boardwalk. One of the reasons that the boardwalk did lift is it wasn't properly anchored down. We lost memorial plaques in that. We've lost trees and debris and cleanup, so that's a conservative estimate to start. But we won't know the extent until the water levels drop and we can assess where we can reinstall the boardwalk and ensure that it's safe and it doesn't lift in the event that the water levels return to the levels they are now.
And one more question, just is this something that's going to happen again? Is this a permanent fix? Is this something that we'll be looking at having to do again, let's say in 2 years from now, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think we can absolutely emphatically say whether or not we will, and we're going to take all precaution to properly reinstall and look at the best place to reinstall, perhaps staying away from where the water levels we know get high when they do get high. I'm not sure that this is going to be a one-time occurrence for these water levels and lake levels being where they are. So we will definitely assess that before moving on with the repairs and the restoration of the boardwalk.
And that's the concern I have, is that we're going to do this repair only to have to do it again. And, I'd rather take a look and see what we should be doing for a more permanent solution to this problem. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Brunette. Just a couple of questions on page 3, I guess, for staff. Director Graham, maybe. Just some clarification on, and we talked previously about the RFP that you've sent out for detailed design between Martin and Victoria. And then the second one is the RFP for the shoreline assessment, and that's of all of our lakeshore roads?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, yes. What we want to do, so the Martin, the piece of Lakeshore Road east of Martin is going to be a more focused study to figure out how we can, what is the solution for that location.
Okay.
And then the other study that's noted in this report is more of an overall assessment of the entire shoreline, all of our shoreline roads, to help quantify the erosion damage and provide some strategies for us to move forward with on how we're going to develop a long-term plan for our Lakeshore Road shorelines. So it's more of an overall assessment of all of the other roads.
Okay, so two separate ones?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize for getting ahead of myself there with those councillor questions, so thank you very much. We now have a motion to receive and file report PW-20-19, the Emergency Flooding Update Lakeshore Roads. Whereas the municipality of the Corporation of the Town of Lincoln recently experienced severe storm and flooding starting April 30th, 2019 through June and remains ongoing, and whereas the Corporation of the Town of Lincoln has experienced incremental operating and capital costs as a result of this weather event, and whereas eligible municipal costs are anticipated to exceed $433,832, which, as our CEO has pointed out, is 3% of our 2017 own purpose taxation. Therefore, it be resolved that the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Lincoln hereby requests the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to activate the Municipal Disaster Recovery Assistance Program. And number two, that the appointed treasurer for the Corporation of the Town of Lincoln be delegated authority to verify and attest to the accuracy of the submitted claims as required. We will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Reimer, all in favor? And that is carried. The next item, we are now considering item 7.9, PW-21-19, the Niagara Regional Transportation Services Capital Projects 5-year overview for Lincoln. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none, I want to thank Director Graham or those people responsible for summarizing this for us. This is follow-up from the presentation we had from the director from the region of Niagara and the associates there a couple meetings ago. So this is a report that summarizes the 5-year overview. So thank you very much for that. So we have a motion to receive and file report PW-21-19, the Regional Transportation Services Capital Project 5-year overview for Lincoln. We will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Rinjema, all in favor? And that is carried. So, Madam Clerk, we are now going to go back to the consent agendas that were pulled off, which were originally 6.1, 6.2, and 6.4. So we'll start with the 6.1, which is the Public Works Quarterly Project and Program Update Report. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and first of all, compliments to both Public Works and Community Services for these very easy to read, well laid out reports. It is a pleasure to get these and get these updates. So nice job by both departments to put this together. Very colorful, very, very well done. So I wonder if I could ask Walter if he wouldn't mind stepping to the mic, and I just would like you to give us on the Public Works report here. We've got the Jordan Village Improvement Project, and I wonder if you wouldn't mind giving a short little. I know you've had no notice to this, but just in your eyes, last night's meeting, and what was your take on the meeting, the feedback you got, and maybe a little bit about next steps for us. Thank you.
Is it on? Okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. We had a public meeting yesterday for the Jordan Village Improvement Project. We expect that to be our final PIC, and we're excited as a team to finally be able to move forward with the final design. As was presented to the public, I feel that we've got the majority of the comments that we received were all positive. I think the community is excited to see the project progress. I think that was probably the number one comment that I received, which was, when are we gonna get this started? When are shovels getting in the ground? So, with that said, the next steps, we're planning on presenting to council an action plan through the budget process. Next year, we're hoping to start working on utility relocations, and we're working with the consultant right now to kind of figure out what is the best way to attack this project, because it is going to be multi-year. It is going to be 2 to 3 years. Director Graham would like to see the project be completed within 2 years after the utility relocation projects. The utility relocations are completed, so that's kind of what our target is, and we're working with the consultant, and we'll have to work with the Niagara region to see if that is feasible. But right now, we're looking at a 2 to 3 year construction window after the utility works are done. So, do you have any more questions?
No, thank you, Walter, and that's exactly the feedback that I took, and I think Councillor Miklik took last night, was everybody was, you know, there was a little tweak suggestion here or there, but generally it was, let's get going, let's start the project. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
In that report also, there is a update on the Jordan Station and Camden II investigation study, and in there, it says next steps, Bridgeport Pumping Station upgrades, proposed construction 2020, and I think there's an update to that. If I could ask Director Graham, if you could share with us what that update is, that would be wonderful.
Director Graham?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. So the Bridgeport Pumping Station is a regional, Niagara region project. So the pumping station's owned and operated by the Niagara region. In this particular report, we have noted that the station work was gonna happen in year 2020. Recently, the region has advised us that's been pushed back a year and will be in 2021. We are continuing, though, to, you know, work with the region to see how we can get that moved up to align with the Phelps development and, you know, keep this moving forward. The town, you know, we're ready with the Red Maple storm drainage and road upgrade works, you know, to go with the schedule, but yes, this particular project has been moved back a year at this point as an update.
So, and it's unfortunate that Councillor Foster left, because I think it's important, and I know the staff is going to continue to work with the region to keep their feet to the fire and try to move that in as best we can, because I think when you look at this particular developer, and really any developer, you know, when you get a delay like this, especially on a piece of property that you've had in your hands for several years, there's some pretty significant carrying costs that go along with that that project, and in our efforts to be open for business, you know, when you get something like, it's somewhat out of our control, I get that, but still, you know, it doesn't bode well in our community, in our efforts to be successful in our efforts to be open for business. So, you know, I did want to make this public. I do want to make a request of staff to keep working with the region. You know, let's get Councillor Foster involved, and let's try to push as hard as we can, because it's not just the development either. You know, we've got challenges in that area with the pumping station, and, you know, the folks that have been coming out to our ward meetings have put pretty significant pressure on us to fix it, because, you know, they're seeing issues in their basements, you know, in heavy rains, and, you know, that is a huge consideration here as well. So we really need to make the region aware that this is not only a growth opportunity, but it is an issue in the community that we are dealing with, and doing everything we can through Jillian and the team, but yet the pumping station is critical. So thank you, Mr. Graham, and disappointing, and let's just keep moving that forward. So that's all I had on that report.
Thank you, Councillor. All great points. Thank you, Director Graham. I'm just going to go to our CAO to see if he has anything to add, because I do believe he told me that he just had a meeting with Acting CAO, Mr. Tripp from the region, and there might be some additional information. I'm not sure, but I'm just going to go to Mr. Krikopoulos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You are correct. Staff did meet with Acting CAO at the region, Mr. Tripp. Ms. Harris has spent considerable time, as has Director Graham, in terms of looking at this potential setback. I know when we had conversations with the developer, they definitely weren't happy with this timeline adjustment. They had initially been told 2020, and now we're looking at a 2021 completion date. I think from the perspective of our staff, we will continue to push. We are applying, I think, that necessary pressure, and tonight is I think helpful for us to be able to go back and have those conversations with regional staff in terms of how we do some concurrent works, how we look at a compressed schedule that may allow us to at least shave off a number of months, if not the full year, at least half a year, so that construction can begin in August of 2020 for Phelps Homes. Again, I think we're looking at trying to be creative here, but definitely helps when we have, I think, that council comment. What we heard here tonight will be something that we relay through and continue to advocate that this be brought forward. Of course, the region has shared with us a number of competing priorities across all of Niagara region, and so that continued advocacy will be important.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. So seeing no other questions, so this was originally, Madam Clerk, was 6.1 on the consent agenda. We are now calling it 7.10. On the regular agenda, the Public Works Quarterly Project and Program Update Report, and I will require a mover to approve. To receive for information, can I, thank you, Councillor Timmers. All in favor? That is approved. The next item, which was item 6.2 on the consent agenda, we are now calling it 7.11, 7.11, the Community Services 2019 Mid-Year Progress Report. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, great report. This does dovetail into Walter's comments last night when we were at the public meeting for the Jordan Improvement Project. One of the other asks of several of the folks that were there was what's going on with the museum. So if I could ask Director McKay to comment on a possible start date for the museum, that would be great.
Absolutely, through you, Mr. Chair. Well, staff have been working behind the scenes since the groundbreaking at the end of May. There's a lot of work on site preparation and access for construction. So we are very close to being on the site for excavation. But before we do that, we need to get the perimeter fence up, which will start in about a week or so. And then clearing. Clearing may actually start a little bit sooner, not clearing with excavation and digging, but clearing of the shrubbery and that goes down the fence line there. So residents and council who drive by the site can expect to see some activity within the coming days, I promise you. And trail closure signs are also going to be going up at the bottom of the bottom of the embankment there to prevent people from coming up the trail to the museum site once we start that. So those signs are ready to go, and they'll be installed next week.
Mr. Chair, that's great to hear, and I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention that great to hear that we got another significant contribution to the museum this past week, and that people are continuing to step up and make really, really nice contributions. So congratulations to all involved. Thank you.
Councilor McPherson, you're okay? Okay. So similar to the 6.1, this is 6.2. We now require a mover to receive for information. Councilor Reimer, all in favor? And that is carried. I just, before I move on to item 6.4, I just want to reiterate what Councilor McPherson said, and I think we've mentioned this to a couple of the people involved, but these are great documents. These investing in our community and investing in our parks and investing in our supporting our community. These are great reports. These are mid-year progress reports. There's a tremendous amount of work that's been done in a short period of time. And certainly, I know as a councillor, as we move forward and have our ward meetings, I think these are just wonderful documents. They're very, very telling in the work that we've done. So I certainly will be using these reports in my ward meetings as we move forward. And I just want to thank all those involved from the staff side as well as the communication side. This is great work. So the next item, 6.4, that was pulled from consent agenda, CS 16-19, 2019 Grow, Prosper, Belong Community Fund Allocation, which will now be referred to as 7.12 in our consent agenda. Okay. Councilor McPherson.
So on this one, Councilor Pachariva did send through an email, and his question was with regards to the split of the monies, and there was a question as far as Jordan Skate Club and why we would make a contribution to that organization when we subsidize the icing for them today. And he also questioned the contribution to Village of Hope and made a suggestion on a contribution to cycling grants and to St. Helens Church. So that basically is a summary of his email. Through you to the staff, I guess, Mr. Chair.
So,
Director McKay, thank you.
through you, Mr. Chair. So I'll start, and then I'll turn it over to Associate Director Sarah Ain. So what I can tell you is that per the eligibility criteria, all of the groups that are being recommended to be awarded a grant met all of the eligibility criteria. The evaluation committee consisted of a staff representation from across the organization, the CAO's office, finance, legislative services, and community services. The evaluation process was very comprehensive and detailed. There was a very detailed evaluation form that committee used. And certainly, we could go one by one if that's what you would like, but they met the provisions of the grant, they met the criteria, they were not deemed ineligible per the criteria, and the group feels very strongly that they contribute value to the community based on the provisions that we've outlined in the Grow, Prosper, Belong policy.
Councillor McPherson?
Sarah can share her comments and then.
Through you, Mr. Chair, with respect to St. Helens Church and, pardon me, Cycling Without Age, both of those groups were deemed ineligible, so unless there's a specific question about why they were deemed ineligible, I'm not clear on what the concern is. With respect to the Jordan Skating Club, their request was for a new sound amplification system and assistance with redesigning their website, so some promotional. They are a group that receives, if you will, waiving of fees for ice time and room rentals. However, there are other groups on this list as well that also receive that. So we were really looking at what this specific event program project was. They did request for an additional $1,000 of waived rental fees, which will be referred to a totally different process through the community group affiliation. So that's how we arrived at that decision. Village of Hope, I'm also not clear on what the concern is with that, so I don't know if you can elaborate on that. We'd be happy to address it. I'm just not clear on what the issue is with the Village of Hope.
And unfortunately, I can't read between the lines on his email, so I think, he'd have to share with you where he's at. I'm assuming that when he's looking at the Jordan Skating Club, that they are very similar to the Beamsville Hockey Association or Jordan Hockey, Association, and this particular fund is for groups that, are outside any kind of town support. And I'm just reading between the lines. That's what I would think he's looking at is we already support them over here, and there's probably a whole lot of groups that we don't that are needing of funds as well, and why would we do it over here and then also do it here? I'm guessing that that's where he's coming from.
Through you, Mr. Chair, currently in the policy that was reviewed and approved in the spring, there was no provision in the policy that said that these groups couldn't apply if they were receiving a waiving of fees or an approved community group. That's consistent also with the way it's always been done. We didn't change that. It wasn't a request from council to make that change. There's another group on this list that also receives in-kind services from us through facility use as well. So I would just want to really caution that if we're pointing at one specific group, that we are being fair and equitable with all of the groups that receive from us, because there are a couple that are on this list.
There you go.
Yeah, Councillor McPherson, you were put in an awkward spot. Councillor Patriva sent a late email in his absence and asked that to be brought forward. So I do appreciate you bringing it off the consent agenda, and we have discussed it, and we have tried to get some clarification, and I appreciate staff's comments in the fact that they are all meeting the criteria. So, Mr. CEO, did you have something you wanted to add?
Through Mr. Chair, I think it's, this is one of those topics that I think every year we probably get more funding requests, totaling more than we have available, and I think there's often a number of very worthy causes, worthy organizations in our community that do excellent work of all sorts of backgrounds. I think where we can, we also do, as you've heard from both Sarah and Shannon, provide that in-kind contribution, try to work with them, try to find other ways, if not successful through these grants, where we can be of assistance. And so that will continue with a number of organizations, whether they chose to apply, didn't choose to apply, or were unsuccessful in applying. So I think it's just important to highlight for us that while we've exhausted this particular grant, there are a number of other ways we can continue to assist community organizations.
Thank you, Mr. CEO, for that information. So we will now require a mover to receive this CS-16-19, the 2019 Grow, Prosper, Belong Community Fund Allocation, and I will require a mover. Yes, the motion is to receive for information report CS-16-19 regarding the 2019 Grow, Prosper, Belong Community Fund allocation, and to approve the disbursement of funds in their totality in the amount of $18,000 to the successful applicants as outlined in report CS-16-19. I was about to go to I guess we're good. I have a mover, Counselor Timmers. All in favor? And that is approved. We are now at number 9 on the agenda, confidential items. We have no confidential items this evening. Number 10 on the agenda, staff remarks. Do we have any staff remarks at this point? Seeing none. Item number 11, committee remarks. Do we have any committee remarks? Seeing none. There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned.